The HOA president had barely finished the vote when the entire room went silent. Ethan sat in the back row under a projector light that washed over maps of the farm he had spent 2 years trying to buy. Linda stood at the front in a dark magenta blazer, curly golden hair framing a face that looked certain the community had won. Around her, the board women in fully dressed dark rose jackets looked almost satisfied. They had just blocked the purchase in front of dozens of residents. They believed they had protected their neighborhood. What none of them understood was that the land they were trying to stop depended completely on something Ethan already owned. He did not argue right away. He simply sat there listening while the room tried to decide what he was supposed to do next. But Ethan's focus stayed on the folder in his hands, paperwork that could shift the entire power dynamic of this meeting in a way the board never anticipated. Ethan Ward had spent years building a land restoration business that turned neglected properties into working farms again. The abandoned 1,000-acre tract on the edge of a luxury HOA neighborhood had been sitting in limbo for so long that most people stopped seeing opportunity and started seeing inconvenience. Ethan didn't see decay. He saw the bones of something repairable. His grandfather once worked that land, and the thought of losing it for good had haunted him through every late night of research and every setback that came with trying to purchase it. When he finally had a chance, he treated the deal like more than a transaction. It was unfinished history. It was family. And while the HOA board talked about standards and protecting property values, Ethan noticed how quickly their attitude changed the moment his name entered the conversation. Even before anyone verified facts, the tension was already there. Suspicious looks, delayed responses, and the feeling that the outcome was decided in advance. The first clear strike arrived dressed up as procedure. The board filed a formal objection with the county, insisting the farm restoration would create problems that, in practice, sounded selective and exaggerated. They described traffic, dust, noise, and visual disruption as if Ethan planned to turn the countryside into something chaotic instead of restoring it into farmland again. The strange part was how detached the accusations were from reality, especially when the property had sat abandoned while nobody in the HOA had invested time or effort into understanding what restoration would actually involve. County email threads started slowing down. Questions became repeated instead of resolved. A survey crew scheduled to confirm basics suddenly faced resistance. Contractors noticed it too. Extra steps, extra checks, extra uncertainty that didn't appear for other projects. Ethan realized this wasn't just concern. It was obstruction, presented as if it were protection. After the initial objection, the pressure spread into everything around the deal. Anonymous complaints began reaching county offices whenever equipment was delivered. Inspectors requested additional verification for work that should have been straightforward. A contractor received warnings that permits might become difficult if progress continued on Ethan's timeline. Even access planning developed sudden obstacles, with road questions and staging area disputes returning again and again. The HOA kept holding polished meetings inside their community hall, using maps and carefully worded explanations about harmony and standards, but the effect outside those rooms grew heavier with each week. Ethan stayed steady, not because he enjoyed the conflict, but because he understood that the HOA's tactics depended on him getting tired first. So he went deeper into the records. In the property files, he found references to water easements and older agreements, details that sounded boring at first, until they began to connect to the same community resource the HOA insisted it was protecting. The final provocation came when the HOA escalated from resistance to interference. They pushed for delays on access roads and utilities, trying to freeze progress through paperwork and repeated objections rather than through direct, legitimate claims. They flooded staff with last-minute complaints designed to overwhelm timelines and scare vendors into backing away. The message was clear. If they couldn't stop the purchase by force, they would try to break it by exhaustion. Ethan did not panic because the deal had already closed. The farm was officially his. More importantly, the water rights tied to the property had never truly been separated the way the HOA assumed. When a county attorney contacted the HOA requesting clarification about water access agreements connected to Ethan's newly purchased land, the tone across the neighborhood changed. Panic didn't arrive as a dramatic scene. It spread quietly through the board once records were reviewed and their assumptions became impossible to ignore. Their power attempt had been built on a mistake they never checked, and when they realized what was connected to Ethan's farm, their confidence began to collapse. Everything shifted at the county review meeting when the records were laid out with no room left for reinterpretation. The chain of title was clear. The easements were real. The water system serving the neighborhood depended on agreements tied directly to Ethan's farm. Residents who had been nodding along with the HOA sat frozen as understanding settled in. The board women who seemed certain of themselves now looked uncertain, as if their rehearsed narrative had suddenly lost its footing. Linda's expression tightened for the first time, her controlling composure replaced by something closer to alarm. County officials made the situation plain. The restoration could move forward, and intimidation could not be used as a substitute for property law. Ethan did not celebrate. He watched the truth take hold while the HOA faced the consequences of fighting the wrong target. Their campaign against him had been designed to trap him before the paperwork could matter. But the paperwork did matter, more than the HOA wanted it to. After the meeting, the neighborhood changed quickly, and the shift was not subtle. Complaints stopped, permits moved forward. Contractors returned without the constant fear that every step would trigger another obstacle. The farm restoration finally began properly, and the results showed up where denial used to be. Fences were repaired, soil was cleared, equipment moved across the acres again. Water flowed through restored lines that had sat dormant for far too long. Ethan stood on the land and looked across the fields with a steady kind of relief, thinking about his grandfather, about the years of work, about how close the whole plan had come to disappearing under pressure tactics. In the HOA, the fallout was just as visible. Residents began questioning the board, wondering why they had fought so hard against the very person connected to their water access. Linda's influence faded fast, and internal board behavior changed as the community realized that control without verification only leads to embarrassment. Ethan's takeaway was simple and hard-earned. The fight had never really been about an image. It was about who understood the land well enough to protect it. If you made it this far, consider this. When people try to control a place they don't truly understand, how often do they end up defeating themselves? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you've dealt with HOA pressure, tell me your story.